Before we get started, I'd like to start by bringing up one thing. You know, everybody really got shellacked at this last election. I thought we were going to win that last election. I know most of you thought we were going to win that last election. And the mood in the country since the last election among many people that love this country has been a sort of a, you know, how much of this can we take? Really, maybe the thing to do is just to stock up on ammo and beans and go to Montana and just hope that we don't have to live to see this thing. But the fact that you're here tonight is a real encouraging moment. And I'd like you guys just to reflect on one thing before we get started. You know, you don't get to be Winston Churchill in the sunlight. The only people that get to connect themselves with Winston Churchill are people who continue the fight in the darkest hour. That man made a conscious decision every morning to get up and believe that they were going to win World War II. When any other prime minister would have made a deal with Adolf Hitler for the best possible peace they could negotiate, when any other prime minister would have said, we can't possibly beat this people, I'm sure Winston Churchill had his doubts about whether they could beat them. But every morning he got up and stood on the rubble of those bombed-out buildings with his hat and his umbrella, and he'd give them the V for victory. And if you know anything about Great Britain, this isn't actually the V for victory. But he would curse those bombers as they went home, and he made a conscious decision every day to keep fighting and win. And he did keep fighting, and they did win. And that's why we're speaking English and not German tonight. It's a decision. Failure is a decision. Defeat is a decision. Victory is a decision. And the fact that you've come out to an event like this tells me that there are people all around this country, I see them every day, that have not given up, and they want to stay in this fight. As conservatives, we have a much tougher battle than our progressives on the other side of the aisle. For many reasons. First of all, I had a chance to introduce Jim DeMint not too long ago, and Jim DeMint said the problem we have is the liberals are giving away free candy, and our side is trying to sell vegetables. And he's right. So one of the first rules about that is if you're facing that kind of uphill fight, we vegetable sellers have to stick together. You can't have the asparagus guys saying broccoli's no good. We can have arguments internally, but honestly, folks, if we're dealing with people who are in opposition to us, who are giving away free candy to the American people, and we're on, you know, fourth stage diabetes and suffered from an obesity epidemic, if we're trying to sell vegetables in competition to that, we vegetable sellers have to stick together. So we're all on the same team here, and we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. But first of all, I just wanted to start by thanking you very much for coming out and having the courage to keep up the fight, because conservatism ultimately just means that every single morning you have to roll that rock back up the hill. And every single night it comes back down again, and every day you have to get out there and roll it up the hill again. And we can never win this fight. We can only lose it. We just have to get up every week and mow the grass. Anyway, I'd like to start by talking about a situation that some of you older people here may remember personally. Speaking about World War II and moments of crisis and moments of despair, in December of 1944, it looked like the Allies had the war more or less wrapped up. Some of these guys thought these guys might be home by Christmas. But Adolf Hitler had different plans. And in December of 1944, he had saved the very best of his armor and the very best of his shock troops. And he decided to pour them through the Western Front in the Ardennes forest and hit the weakest part of the American line in the Ardennes. And Nazi armor divisions, panzer divisions, SS divisions came pouring through the Ardennes forest and hit the weakest part of the line, where we had some very, very tired and exhausted troops, 101st Airborne and otherwise just cooks and clerks. They utterly surrounded this town called Bastogne, utterly, completely had them utterly overrun. And one day just before Christmas, one of the commanders at Bastogne, a guy named Creighton Abrams, who the Abrams tank is named after, got up on a church tower. And he looked around with his binoculars, and every single point on the compass, no matter which way he turned, he could see Nazi positions all the way around him, 360 degrees. So he turned to his adjutant and he said, well, they've got us completely surrounded, the poor bastards. And that's how we should be feeling right now. They've got us completely surrounded, the poor bastards. They have academia, they have high schools, colleges, universities, they have late-night talk shows, they have comedy, they have movies, they have television, they have all this other stuff. We're completely surrounded, and I pity them, because we are going to destroy these people, because we have forces at work that I'm going to outline a little bit tonight that are working in our favor, and all we have to do is just get in front of them. We don't even have to lift this load. We just have to get in front of it and put our little brand on it. When you see in a minute what I'm talking about, you're going to realize that the future belongs to us, not to them, no matter what they'll tell you. The future belongs to us, because society is changing, and it's changing in ways that benefit conservatisms and benefit freedom-loving people everywhere. So what do I mean when I say we have big forces at work? Well, I'll get to that in a second. But as Lud said, our country's in trouble. And I think he's absolutely right. I think our country is in worse trouble than we've ever been in our history. Because when we think about threats to America, we think about military threats, and we think about all the wars we faced and all the enemies we faced. But I'm not worried about enemies. I'm really not. This country was founded by defeating the most powerful military force on the face of the earth. This nation was birthed by defeating the British Empire. We fought the toughest armies on the world, other Americans, in the Civil War, and we're still here. We beat the technological genius of the Nazis. We beat the heroic fanaticism of the Japanese. We spent 50 years beating this horrible totalitarian slavery called communism that has kept two-thirds of the world in slavery. We beat them. And the jihadis attacked us 10 or 11 years ago. We knocked their teeth in. I'm not worried about threats to this country. It's not to say we don't take them seriously, but they cannot destroy America. Abraham Lincoln understood this. No foreign power can destroy America. There's only one thing that can destroy America, and that's other Americans. So let me show you something that I carry with me everywhere I go. These are props, but because they're props doesn't mean they're not real. These are actual items here. I got them somewhere in here, I know. Where did I put that? Here it is. I'd like to show you a couple pieces of colored paper that I carry with me here. They're just colored square pieces of paper, and they have pictures on them and numbers. Here's one of them. It's a $20 bill, and it's drawn on the United States Treasury. And here's another one. This is also legal tender. This is also actual cash. I can use it against the bank it's drawn on, and it's drawn on the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and this piece of paper is in the amount of $100 trillion. $100 trillion. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I never leave the house without $100 trillion on me. You know, you may get snowed in Denver, may need to buy United Airlines. But $100 trillion here, $20 here. They're pieces of paper. They have pictures on them and numbers. And if I put these two pieces of paper on any table in the world and asked anybody in the world to pick up one of them, they pick up this one and not this one because they perceive that this one can still buy something. But when people no longer believe that this can buy anything, when they make so many of these things with this reckless spending and the full faith and credit of the United States government becomes a laughingstock, when people no longer believe that this is worth anything, then we don't know what that future looks like. That can actually destroy America as a country and destroy our way of lives in ways that we cannot comprehend. We've only had that kind of economic crisis once before in the late 20s and the 30s with the Depression, but we have to remember half of the country lived on farms in the 30s. Half of the country was self-reliant, made their own food. Half of the country had electricity, or maybe slightly more, but a lot of people didn't even have electricity. Those people lived outdoors and they could grow their own food. People under 20 years today, I don't think half of the 20 years, people 20 and under, have ever been outside. It is not going to be recognizable what this debt crisis can do to our country. It will destroy this nation, and so we cannot allow it to happen. We simply cannot allow it to happen. And that means we have to stop these people. We have to stop them now. And that means 2012 and 2014, sorry, we're already past 2012, 2014, 2016, we have to stop these people politically. So if we're going to stop them politically, how do we do that? We've had so many failures, and we've been so unsuccessful against these people that it makes us all think, well, there's no chance. We can't possibly beat these people. We can't beat the demographics. It's not true. It's not true. So before we get into these titanic forces, let me just say one thing about the way our team has been playing ball here. And before I go any further, I want to say one thing so that I'm very clearly understood about this. I think Mitt Romney was the most well-prepared, most well-qualified candidate ever to run for president, ever. And I think you have to go back to George Washington to find a man with as good a moral character as Mitt Romney. I think he deserved to be president. I think he would have made an excellent president. I admire him enormously as a man. I do not want to be seen to be criticizing him or his team, but we have to understand what we did wrong in order to not do it wrong again. So here's what I think is actually happening. I think what's happening in terms of the upper-level GOP and in the Republican parties and leadership and the candidates all throughout the country, I think that right now Republicans are making in real time, right in front of our eyes, the single greatest mistake that was ever made in business history. Certainly the greatest marketing mistake. And I'll give you this little example that I think is really useful to think about. Let's say that during the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, throughout most of American history, let's say that this view of America, this view that we share as conservatives, of America as a good place, where hard work is rewarded, and wealth creation, and effort, and sacrifice, patriotism, that America. Let's call that America Coca-Cola. Because in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, everybody drank Coca-Cola. And everything that we did as a society was really an ad for Coca-Cola. All the movies that Hollywood made were advertisements for that view of America that we have as conservatives, for America as being a good place. I'll give you an example that may not even stick out as an example. It's certainly not a political movie, but think about this. It's a Wonderful Life is an ad for Coca-Cola, because for this conservative view of America, because It's a Wonderful Life is based on this idea that we share, that America is a fundamentally good place. America's not an evil place. Bedford Falls, which is America, is a fundamentally good place. And it's good because of the good people in Bedford Falls. And when you take one of those good men with his virtue, George Bailey, out of America, when you take the goodness of the individual out of America, then it artificially becomes a bad place. It turns into Potterville. Very different than the movies Hollywood makes today, where America's a fundamentally evil place and somebody wakes up to the fact. No, It's a Wonderful Life is an ad for Coca-Cola, for classical patriotic America. A good man is removed from a good place, the place becomes a bad place. And at the end of this story, the good man is put back into Potterville, and it goes back to being a good place again, Bedford Falls. George Bailey realizes it's not about achievement, it's not about money, it's about your character, it's about your virtue. And he wakes up and he's the richest man in Bedford Falls. That's an ad for Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola owned the world. It was the most popular brand in the world. The Coke bottle shape's the most recognizable shape. It was the #1 brand in the world. And so was conservatism. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, two things happened in parallel. Progressivism and statism, and I want to be crystal clear that I'm not talking about Democrats, because there are millions and millions and millions of patriotic Democrats, millions and millions and millions of Democrats who serve in the armed forces. I'm not talking about those good Americans who have different view of things. I'm talking about the left-wing progressive statists, the Marxists who have taken over this party and this administration. But much like their rivals, much like Pepsi-Cola in the 60s, these guys were much, much smaller, and they had much more limited resources. So what did Pepsi do when everybody was drinking Coke? Well, Pepsi said, we don't have Coca-Cola's advertising budget. We can't spread our advertising over the entire society because it'll just get lost. So Pepsi decided, like the progressives decided, that we are going to take our much smaller advertising budget and we're going to all spend all of it in one place only, and that is on young people. Young people. Because Pepsi knew, and the progressives knew, that if you had a limited budget but you spent it exclusively on young people, those young people would grow up drinking Pepsi. And when they got married, they'd get married to other Pepsi drinkers. And when they had families, they'd go to the supermarkets and they'd buy Pepsi, and then their kids would drink Pepsi. And all of those kids downstream would drink Pepsi, and we'd become a Pepsi nation. And that's exactly what the progressives did in the 60s. They put all of their effort into colleges to train teachers so that those teachers would then teach generations of conservative kids how to become progressives. And it's been a 40-year program, and it's worked spectacularly. Just look at the president we have. Look at the attorney general we have. It's been an out-of-the-park success for them. How did they get away with it? And how does this affect Republicans today? Well, I think the GOP today is doing exactly what Coca-Cola did in the 1980s when they watched the market share of Pepsi growing. Rather than getting out in front of the American people and saying, hey, let's put some advertising into Coke because Coke is the real thing, Coke is the most popular drink in the world, what the ad executives convinced the people at Coca-Cola to do was they convinced them to change Coca-Cola. They took the #1 brand in the world and got rid of it, and came up with something called New Coke, which tastes more like Pepsi. Because everybody's drinking Pepsi. Let's make Coca-Cola taste more like Pepsi. How'd that work out for them? It was the biggest catastrophe in American history because Coca-Cola drinkers didn't like this New Coke swill. They had nothing to do with it, and Pepsi drinkers didn't like it either. Nobody liked it. Isn't that exactly what the GOP is basically telling us today? That we have to be less conservative, that we have to get off of this brand? Last time we ran a conservative president was Ronald Reagan, and he only carried 49 out of 50 states. He came within 5,000 votes of running the table. 49 out of 57 states, Mr. Obama, that's a significant percentage. Last time we ran Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola won big. The cycle before that, in 1980, we won, 45, 46 states? We ran an election in 2010, for those of you that want you to believe that conservatism is over in this country. 2010 was a Coca-Cola election. The Tea Party came out with a political message of raw conservatism saying, we are going to stop Obamacare. And it was the second biggest electoral shift in the century, in the last 100 years, I should say. So when you run Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola wins. So why is it that we're constantly told we have to run something that doesn't taste like Coca-Cola, we have to move towards Pepsi? Why is it that the #1 brand in politics, this conservative brand that provides so much wealth and so much prosperity and so much freedom and so much happiness, why are we told that we have to water that down and give it up to move towards this socialist agenda in order to convince independents and moderates to vote for us? You don't win elections by pandering to independents and moderates. You win elections by turning independents and moderates into conservatives. And that's exactly what Ronald Reagan did. And it's actually very easy to do this. There's really nothing to it. The reason that we're going to beat these people is because that major historical forces are working in our favor. And one of the things that we try to do with this virtual presidency is not just criticize the existing political situation, but to provide alternatives and to provide some forward-looking ideas. So let me give you just a little bit of history real quick, because this should encourage all of you. There's really only been 3 things that have happened in human history. There's been hundreds of wars and thousands of nations and plagues and scourges. Only 3 things have ever really happened. About 7,000 years ago, the first thing that ever happened, and that was the invention of agriculture. Once people learned that they could grow crops, they could stay in one place, you didn't have to have every single person making their own food, hunting and gathering their own food. One person could grow enough food for many people, and that meant that you could have cities and you could have priests and scientists and doctors and philosophers and musicians and all this other stuff. It was an agricultural society. And if you think about everything that we love about America, everything that's enshrined in this Constitution, everything about our founding fathers and their vision of America is the product of an agricultural society. Their vision for the federal government was a vision that farm people had. They were very independent people. Their idea of the federal government basically was give us a navy to keep the British away, give us an army to keep the Indians and those warlike Canadians at bay, and maybe pave the road from my farm to the market, but otherwise leave us alone. And so this vision of America and the federal government was based on an agricultural society. But society changed. And when the economy changed, the government had to change. So as we get out of the Civil War and the turn of the last century, we start to see the second big thing that happened in human history, the Industrial Revolution. What does the Industrial Revolution require? No longer are people and power dispersed onto farms. Now everybody's living in cities. And you can have millions and millions of immigrants come over. And all you have to do is teach them how to turn a single lever on an assembly line, and they've got a job. And so the government had to change to match the new economy. And if you think about how the government changed with all these progressive agendas, progressive amendments rather, you start seeing things like the income tax and prohibition. Alcoholism is a city problem, it's not a farm problem. And public funding for public education and public health and mass transit. The economy changed and the government changed to match the economy. And so now we have an industrial era government, very centralized, very vertical, very rigid, very stupid, very expensive, very unionized, very slow, very, very big, and very, very dumb. My childhood was spent in the industrial era. When I was a kid, we didn't have all these choices. The industrial era is very centralized. So when I was a kid, you had 3 TV stations. You could watch ABC, CBS, or NBC. We didn't have 400 channels of TV. The only reason people watch hee-haws is because there's nothing else on Sunday night. If you wanted to buy a car when I was a kid, you had a choice of 3. You could buy a Ford, a Chevy, or a Chrysler. We had one phone company. But about 40 years ago, the third major thing happened. The information age came. And that changed the economy. And since the economy is changing, the government's going to change. You see this device here? This is an iPhone 5. This is the most in-demand product in the world. Using this product, I can stand here at this podium right now, and I can order steel from China with a swipe of my credit card, and it will be delivered by UPS or FedEx whenever I want it, whenever I need it. And if you think that this federal government, as it exists in Washington, can control 350 million people who can make those kind of business transactions sitting in a restaurant, you're out of your minds. This future is not only coming, it's here. We still have one foot in industrial era, but every day we get closer and closer to an information age, and this information age is coming, it's here, and these things provide stuff that we should love as conservatives because this new economy is not rigid, vertical, unionized, expensive, stupid, and slow. It's not a giant sucking hole that pulls all the money out of society, keeps most of it, sends some of it back, and takes your freedoms away in the bargain. This new economy is driven by people who are entrepreneurs, who are individuals, who are working in local networks in real time, and they're bargaining for prices. You know how many unions there are in the information age? You know how many unions there are for graphic designers out there? 0. You know how many video game designers and video game coders and shaders are unionized? 0. It's a gig-based economy. It's changing. And that means that the government has to change as well. So we can ask somebody, what do you do for a living? In an industrial area, we say, what do you do for a living? I work for Verizon. Nowadays, we'll ask them, what do you do for a living, sir? I work for Verizon. Really? Well, what do you do for Verizon? I'm an electrical engineer and I have some experience in radio frequencies. Okay. What else do you do? That's it. You have any hobbies? Well, I carve duck decoys. Okay. Are they any good? Yeah, I think they're pretty good. Okay, so you electrical engineer, you carve duck decoys. Anything else? I drove a truck in college. So you have a commercial driver's license? Yep. Anything else? I worked on a dairy farm when I was a kid. You run a milking machine? Yes. So you're an electrical engineer, you carve duck decoys, you've got a commercial truck driver's license, and you can run a milking machine. As it turns out, using the internet and using these devices, you can make money doing all 4 of those things. As a matter of fact, sir, if your duck decoys are half as good as you think they might be, you may never work for Verizon again. You may sell duck decoys to people in Madagascar and Argentina and Ireland, and they'll swipe their credit cards and you'll be a millionaire. The government cannot control this kind of economy. And all of the children, all of the young people coming up today understand this. They are not wired for conformity. They're not wired for unions. They're not wired for centralized control. Young people today are wired for local independence, entrepreneurialism, networking, and speed. They shop for prices. This is terrific news. It's the best possible news for us politically. So the question is, how do we get in front of these ideas that are coming anyway and put our brand on them so that these Democrats don't steal it the way they stole liberating black people, which is what Republicans have been doing since the beginning of the Republican Party? How do we do this? Well, I'll tell you. All we really have to do is we have to rebrand our message. And this is the entire goal of the virtual presidency. Now, when I say rebrand things, a lot of times you'll hear people in a failing business say, well, we need to rebrand things. And what they're really talking about is wallpapering over the problems. This is the opposite of what I'm talking about. When I talk about rebranding this conservative message, I'm talking about making this message clearer. I'm not talking about changing our values at all. On the contrary, I'm talking about how do we get our values out there as values. Because whenever we talk about politics, we lose. But whenever we talk about philosophy or morality or ethics, we win. We win big. If we're having a discussion about 30-round magazines, we lose. If we have a discussion about whether or not a 90-pound school teacher has a right to defend her life against 300-pound men in a dark alley, we win. So we just have to understand how to get these political issues and peel the labels off of them and get them down to brass tacks in a way that everybody can understand. This is the power of what we're trying to do here. Because if you look at Barack Obama, he's really a third-rate thinker. He's got a fourth-rate work ethic. He handed out forms in Chicago, but he's surrounded by the power and the majesty of the presidency. And so people pay attention to what he has to say, although these ideas are terrible ideas. They failed everywhere they've been. So what we're trying to do is just basically steal that picture frame and wrap it around really great ideas. But it's got to be more than criticism. It has to be alternatives and solutions. Now Doc here is working on a plan for privatized health care that is extraordinarily simple and utterly demolishes Obamacare. But it's an alternative. It's not just criticizing. But we can get this much simpler in terms of this rebranding. I do a lot of speaking at colleges. And one time I was at Oberlin College. And Oberlin is a very liberal university. Oberlin is where reason goes to die. And you talk about people in the audience, and you'll say, how many of you out there voted for Barack Obama? Now, I was invited by the Oberlin Republican Club, which had 3 members in it, no exaggeration, 3. And the chairman was a libertarian who wasn't sure if he was going to go for Romney in the fall. He still had mixed feelings about it. So I'm in a room full of very young, very liberal kids, very liberal. How many of you voted for Obama? Everybody except for the 3 Republicans in the Republican Club raised their hand. And we look at these numbers and we think, oh my God, how are we ever going to win this fight? And I said, okay, let me ask you guys a question. I'm going to ask you which kind of person you are. It's not a trick question. I'm not trying to fool you or fake you out. I just want to know which kind of a person you are. Let's put liberal and conservative and Republican, Democrat aside. Raise your hand if you're the kind of person that likes to be just left alone. Raise your hand. And virtually everybody raises their hand. And then I'll say, okay, now raise your hand if you're the kind of person that likes to tell other people what to do. None of them raise their hands. Some of them do want to tell other people what to do, but none of them are going to admit it in front of their peers. So I say to them, well, if you're the people that want to be left alone and not the people that want to tell other people what to do, that means that your primary focus and virtue is on freedom, not on equality. You're already a third of the way to becoming conservatives. You don't even know it yet. Because we're not talking about labels now. We're talking about, what do you believe? What do you value? Do you like to be left alone, or do you like to tell people what to do? Well, right now there's a party out there that's trying to tell you how much soda you can have, what temperature your house has to be, what kind of car you can drive, what kind of foods you can eat, whether or not you can go skateboarding, how steep a grade you can ride your skateboard on. There's a party that's doing all that stuff, and you just voted for it. It's actually very simple. It's very simple. And in fact, if we want to sell this next generation of kids, and not just kids, if we want to sell these ideas to anybody, all you have to do is sell the ideas. I have to tell you, when you hear Republicans say we need a Hispanic candidate so we can reach the Hispanic audience, that's pandering. These ideas work for everybody, and they know it's pandering. This idea that we have to have a gay messenger to sell this message to gay people, or we have to have a woman candidate so women will vote for us, or a black candidate so that we'll get some of the black vote, it's pandering. It's antithetical to our entire idea of people. We believe in people as individuals. These ideas should work for everybody. And just as a quick diversion, what Mitt Romney should have done, I hate to keep saying what Mitt Romney should have done, but honestly, I think Mitt Romney would have won this election if during the campaign, instead of going to Western Pennsylvania and trying to get the coal voters, if Mitt Romney had gone to a South Philadelphia precinct and gone to an all-black church in South Philadelphia, the bluest of blue constituencies, and stood up on a stage and let people boo him and let him get it all out of their system. He'd stood up in front of a congregation of 1,000 black people in South Philadelphia and said to them something like this: let me tell you why I'm here. I know I'm not going to get any of your votes tonight. I understand that. I'm okay with that. I am. But I'm here for a couple reasons. First of all, I've been lied about. People have lied about me, and it's my self-respect on the line. So I'm going to come here to tell you the truth about me and who I am and what I believe, and then you don't vote for me. That's okay, but I want you to at least not vote for me based on who I actually am. So that's the first thing. But the main reason I'm here is because I respect you enough to put up with all these jeers and catcalls and listen to what you have to say. Because I'm running for president of all the United States of America, and the fact that you're this angry at me and my philosophy means that there's something about me that you don't understand. I have to listen to you. I have to be your president too. If he had gone there and done that, if he had shown them the simple respect of showing up, he would have had to do it one time and one time on the news, and people would have said, well, okay, this guy cares. You know, Romney on exit polling won on the economy, he won on debt reduction, he won on job creation, he won on defense, he won on all these numbers on exit polls, but he lost. Who cares more about you, Mitt Romney or Barack Obama? Barack Obama took home 83% of that vote. And that's why people voted for Barack Obama, because he was perceived to care about them. All Mitt Romney had to do was to go to one of those places one time. And by the way, if I'm in that room full of angry people who are rigidly anti-conservative, I would have looked for the angriest space I could have found in the crowd, and I would have said, sir, let me ask you a question. I vote Republican, and I'm a conservative because it's in my self-interest. You vote Democrat because you perceive it's to be in your self-interest. So we have a lot in common, you and me. But my question for you is this: are you leading the best life that you can imagine for yourself right now? Forget about your kids, forget about the country, forget about the debt, forget about spending any of that stuff. Just put all that aside. Are you leading the best life that you can imagine for yourself right now? Because I don't think you're leading the best life that you could live for yourself right now. I know you're not. You vote for Democrats because Democrats give you things like free cell phones. But it's a piece of crap cell phone. Piece of crap cell phone. It's a second-generation cell phone. It has 60 minutes prepaid on it. It's junk. They give you a piece of crap cell phone. They give you crap housing. They give you crap transportation. They give you crap food. Basically what they do is the Democrats have been giving you a food pellet, because that's how they look at you. They look at you as a herd animal that's part of their flock, and every 2 years they send you out and they harvest your votes. And then they give you just barely enough to get you through to the next election so that they can harvest your votes again. But I can think of a better world for you. If you would get these people out of the way for one election cycle, one time, pull the lever for the Republicans, one time only, 4 years, we will have this economy growing so quickly and so enthusiastically that you won't have to have a piece of crap government-issued phone. There's going to be so many economic opportunities for you that when the iPhone 6 comes out, you'll be able to be the first person in line and hand them $600 of your money, and you will have the best phone in the world. And you'll have better housing, you'll have better transportation. I'm trying to convince you it's in your self-interest to vote for Republicans and conservatives. I would never ask you to vote against your self-interest. You see how simple this is? There's nothing to it. There's nothing to it. So when I talk to young people, I say, really, there's only three things we have to sell to anybody. Young people, gays, Hispanics, doesn't matter. They're individual people. You have to sell three things. Freedom. We've already agreed that most people, especially young people, don't want to be told what to do. They want to be left alone. That's our philosophy, right? I mean, if you think about this last election, here's the bad news. The bad news is they're doing everything right and we're doing everything wrong. The good news is they're doing everything right and we're doing everything wrong. We don't have to do everything right. We just have to do a little right, and they're never going to win again. I mean, how different is it really? Our message is pretty straightforward. We believe in prosperity. We believe in freedom. We believe in success. We're a nation of steely-eyed missilemen with our eyes on a far horizon. We believe in hot women and fast cars and loud guns and freedom and money, and we think if you work hard, you should be able to keep that work, and if you want a nice house, you should have a house. If you work hard enough to have 5 nice houses, you should be able to do that too. Our philosophy is get out of my face, step off, back up, don't tell us what to do. How hard is it to sell this? What's their philosophy? What's the big progressive philosophy for mankind? Limitation and obligation and giving away your hard work to other people. Their vision of America is a bunch of people sitting around thatched huts, sitting around a burning cow pie, pulling parasites off of each other, eating their sustainable algae cakes and raising money for the Guatemalan water snake. You can't compare these two visions. We're doing everything wrong. They're doing everything right. And it's still 50-50. So how do we get the rest of these people on board? Well, the only other two things we have to sell freedom. The second thing we have to sell is wealth creation. Now, wealth creation is actually straightforward. You ask somebody to Google Los Angeles in 1863. You see Los Angeles in 1863, it's a couple of adobe huts, a hitching post, and a donkey. I flew over there, coming up here earlier today. It's improved significantly since then. Why? Where did it all come from? Where did the elevators come from, and the MRI machines, and the Mercedes-Benzes, and the iPhones, and the iPads, and the flat-screen TVs? Where did it come from? Of course wealth can be created out of thin air. Everybody knows it. Whenever you have an idea and you bring that idea into the world, you're generating wealth. But you can't just support something. You also have to be prepared to attack them where they live, because the left survives on moral superiority. It's unearned moral superiority. All of their political policies, all of their questions, all of their beliefs are predicated on the idea that what I believe makes me better than you are. And so you have to attack that. So when we talk about wealth creation with college kids, what I'll often say is, how many of you out there are socialists? And honestly, folks, I hate to break this to you, it's something like 7 out of 10 will raise their hand now. In a liberal place like Oberlin, it's probably 8 or 9 out of 10. How many of you are socialists? They raise their hands. I'll say, okay. Here's what I'd like you to do. What kind of phones do you socialists have, by the way? I've got an i5. What do you guys have? And they'll say, I've got an iPhone 4, I've got a Droid, I've got a Samsung or whatever. And I said, okay, what I want you to do is I want you socialists only now, to bring your phones down and bring them down to the front of the room. And nobody moves. Bring them down. What do you want our phones for? I want your phones because what we're going to do is we're going to put all of your phones in a box. I'm not going to steal them from you. That would be the progressive thing to do. No, I'm not going to steal them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of your phones in a box, and then when I'm finished talking, all of us together are going to get in a car. If I'm in Seattle, let's say, we're going to get in a car, and we're going to go down to downtown Seattle. We're going to find a pawn shop, and we're going to sell these phones. We should be able to get $2,000 for all these awesome phones. We got 35 Droids and iPhones out there, $2,000 easy. We're going to take those $2,000 bills, and we're going to drive around Seattle. We're going to distribute $100 bills to homeless people and poor people and people without the means. Because your philosophy is from each according to his ability to each according to his need. So we're going to go find people with greater need than you. We're going to distribute your wealth to them. Bring the phones down. Guess what? Nobody brings their phones down. You know why? Because they're not socialists. They're capitalists. They just don't know it. This is what happens when you peel labels off of things. Come and bring your phones down. No. Why not? It's mine. You're darn right it's yours. It's yours. They don't bring it down because they're all about wealth redistribution as long as it's somebody else's wealth being redistributed to them. When it's time for them to redistribute their own wealth to other people, suddenly they're the staunchest capitalists in the world. And then you knock out that moral superiority. I'm a socialist because I care about people. I'm a socialist because I care about the poor. No, you're not. No, you're not. Because if you were, you'd have your iPhone down here in a box right now. No, you're not. See this phone? I'm a capitalist. You know whose phone this is? This is my phone. You know why it's my phone? Because I work my tail off for this phone. I get up early every day. I travel around the country. I work very, very hard. I've earned this phone. It's mine. It's mine. Now, A lot of you people think that you're socialists, so you're helping other people. You're not helping other people. You're not helping people in Africa. Did you know, I point a kid out, let's say, I said, do you know the cost of your Droid or your Xbox? Do you know you could feed a village of 100 people in Africa for a year for the price of your toy? So why aren't you selling your toy? Because you don't want to. Now, you may think that makes me callous about Africa, but it doesn't at all. You know why Africa's poor? Africa's poor because Africa's socialist. Africa's poor because Africa identifies itself the same way you do, as socialists, same way you're taught by your teachers. Africa's poor because Africa's waiting for handouts. But I actually care a lot more about Africa than you do, because you know what I do? I go online and I find these microloan things. You ever heard of these microloans to the third world? People set up a business in the third world. Sometimes it'll cost $400 for somebody to open a clothing store in Thailand, or they're making sandals out of abandoned tires in Africa. They need $300 American to get this thing going. So people online, they swipe their credit card, they give $20 or $100, goes to that person, they start their business. Do you know what the repayment rate is on these third world microloans? It's 96%. 96% of that money comes back paid in full, and then you can reinvest it in other people. That's what I do to help Africa. I get people starting businesses, because once they start selling stuff, they start making money. When they start making money, they can start paying other people. Then they're making money. I care more about Africa than you do, because I'm helping people out of poverty. People start looking at you differently. So I've already got them 2/3 of the way. I've got them on terms of they like freedom, and they actually understand wealth creation, and socialism is not what they are. They're not socialists, and they're not Democrats. So what's the third thing you have to sell people on? I think finally the third thing you have to sell them on is pretty simple, and that's virtue. Now the problem with virtue is one of those words that sounds like prudence and chastity, and it sounds like not having sex till you're 70. But when you take a look at this younger generation especially, this generation of young people today is without question the most poorly educated group of Americans we have ever produced, and that's not accidental. But I will tell you this, they are also the most virtuous generation we've ever had. Believe it or not, these people out there today, young people, are very, very serious about doing the right thing. They just don't know what the right thing is. They've been told all their lives that the right thing is to sacrifice other people's money into a big pit. But they do care about other people. So virtue is easy to sell to these people. You tell them about virtue, and you say, virtue is very simple. Virtue just means don't be a jerk. It's just that simple. Don't be a jerk. Don't cut in line. Pay your bills. Do what you said you're going to do. You really want to get virtue down to the brass tacks, it's very simple. Virtue means this: don't hit anybody, and don't take their stuff. How many of you out there, speaking to a young crowd, how many of you out there believe you should be able to just hit people? Nobody raises their hand. How many of you think you should be able to take somebody's stuff? Nobody raises their hands. They're virtuous people. And then you explain to them the entire idea of government and the life that you're leading right now only works because of virtue, because if you have virtuous people, they'll do the right thing on their own. Most of the time, they'll do the right thing. You don't need legions of police forces and surveillance cameras and policemen and trial attorneys and judges and prisons if people do the right thing most of the time. But if you're going to be a jerk, if you're going to hit people and take their stuff, then all of a sudden we have to have all kinds of law enforcement. All of a sudden we need all kinds of other things. So how many of you want to live in a kind of world where everybody's constantly being watched because a couple people are jerks? Raise your hand. Nobody raises their hand. How many of you want to live in a world where everybody's more or less doing the right thing and not being a jerk? Well, you're home. You're conservatives. You believe in freedom, you believe in wealth creation, and you believe in virtue. There's nothing to it. Who cannot sell this stuff, honestly? Honestly, how do you not sell these three things? But somehow we manage not to, because we always talk about policy, and we always duck our head and shuffle our shoes and look down at our feet, and we always pretend that, we're not really that bad. So the final thing I'll leave you with, and then hopefully we can do a couple questions, is this. The left has utterly beaten us down as conservatives and especially as Republicans. We do not want to say what we actually believe because we don't want to face the consequences of what they're going to do to us. But basically what's happened is, if you think in military terms, the left has set up in America today a giant kill box that conservative people, conservative kids, and especially Republican politicians walk into single file. And on this little kill box, which they have down on their own battlefield, it's about 100 yards wide and about 100 yards deep, and it's mined wall to wall, and it's filled with barbed wire, and they've got all their machine gun nests in place, and they've got all their mortars zeroed in, they got all their artillery zeroed in, and they've got helicopters circling around with machine guns and miniguns, and every time one of us walks onto their battleground, they cut us to pieces. And every time one of us gets cut to pieces, the rest of us think, well, I'm not going out there. So the answer, my friends, is not to stop playing the game. The answer is not to get out of politics. The answer is not to give up. And the answer is especially not to surrender and agree with them. The answer is to not walk into the box. The answer is to take a couple of your best guys in helicopters and get far in the back of the rear and blow up an ammo dump instead of walking into this kill box. Hit them where they don't expect it. And then all of a sudden they're going to look around and go, what the hell happened over here? And as they start sending troops to that blown up ammo dump, suddenly a bridge disappears over on the other side of the map. Psh, goes into the water. Who did that? We don't know. We're gone. We're not in their kill zone anymore. So when I talk about rebranding politics, especially for young people today, I talk about it in terms of the culture, in terms of language that they can understand. So again, this is the last thing I'll say before we do questions, but when I talk to young people, they say, well, what is the Tea Party? What does conservatism mean? I go to Tea Party events, and I'll see people often dressed up as George Washington, and I'll see guys dressed like this, and I'm deeply moved by it because I know what it means. If I see a guy standing there and he's wearing the leggings and the waistcoat and the frilled collar and he's got the powdered wig and the tri-corner hat and a musket, it means a lot to me because I understand the values that are behind it, but kids today don't understand any of this. They think it's ridiculous. They see Tea Party things and they see the guys in the costumes and they don't know anything about the history. And they go, what's the matter with these people? This is 300 years ago. What does this have to do with me? They're right. They're right. You just have to change the message. You just have to change the branding. So when I talk about guys in these funny outfits, I take a look at George Washington here and I'll say, yeah, George Washington looks like an old fogey and he's dressed in an old coat and he's carrying a musket and he's got the wig and the tri-cornered hat. But let me tell you something about George Washington. When George Washington was fighting the British, he sent a letter to tailors in London and he said, I would like to purchase 4 waistcoats of the latest design in the most fashionable colors, and I'd like the buttons to be as ornate as possible without becoming ostentatious. George Washington was the best dressed man on the planet. If you want to think about who George Washington really is, you got to get George Washington out of this outfit, because if George Washington were standing here today, he would not be dressed like this. George Washington would be wearing a $12,000 Armani suit, he'd have $2,000 shoes, and he'd have an AR-15 with a target designator laser sight red dot that he could put on anybody because he was the most well-dressed, happening, deadly dude on the planet. And people start to see things in a different way. And so when I talk to Tea Party groups, I said, look, I get it, I do, but if I were you, I'd drop all of this. I'd drop Tea Party, I'd drop the bag, the flag, I'd drop the hat, I'd drop the musket, I'd get rid of all of it. And I would change this logo, this Republican logo. You all know the logo, the big elephant, right? The big blocky elephant. Isn't that exactly their image of us? Blocky, stupid, slow, square, dumb, kind of a hunched over thing with a tiny little trunk. Now, I'd get rid of all of this. I would make the Republican logo an R that looked like it had been carved in the wall, just like straight lines, just like somebody just carved it into a wall and then ran away. Who put that there? We don't know. It's bleeding red. Really? An R? Who are these people? Sometimes people will ask me what the Tea Party's about, young people, and since the election, not before the election, but since the election, I've said, well, somebody says, what your Tea Party guy, what does the Tea Party stand for anyway? And I'll say, well, I don't know how much of it I'm allowed to tell you. But I can say this. First of all, we're horribly outnumbered. Always have been and we always will be. Always been horribly outnumbered. 10 to 1, 20 to 1, 100 to 1. Our philosophy is not for idiots. You have to understand some things about history and you have to understand how economics work if you want to be part of this team. Because we're so badly outnumbered, you see, requires incredible skill and courage to do what we're doing. As a matter of fact, we don't call it the Tea Party, we call it the Rebel Alliance. And it's only because of our mad Jedi skills, which have been acquired over a lifetime of hard work, that 4 or 5 of us are able to get into a bunch of beat-up X-Wing fighters and fly through wave after wave after wave of incoming TIE fighters and incoming stormtroopers, and we're going to go out there, we're going to blow up that Death Star that's going to destroy this life as we understand it because of our courage, our commitment, and our integrity to our Jedi skills. That's who we are. I don't think it's for you. Suddenly, people start to listen. So this is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to take this message not only out through the virtual presidency, but we're trying to get this message and this idea of repurposing, rebranding the essential philosophy, peeling the labels off, getting rid of this liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, peel that away, get down to the core fundamental moral issues and teaching people how to promote these ideas and sell these ideas. And honestly, folks, honestly, I do not see how we could ever lose another election again. We will win by more than the margin of cheating. We'll win by 15 points. We should never, ever take this strategy of, well, we can't win in California. We already know we're going to lose California. You give up California and New York, it's halfway over already. We're going to win every state. Ronald Reagan didn't think California was lost. We're going to win every state. We're going to win every state by 30 points. That's how we have to be looking at it. And so that's why we've invited you here tonight. It's been such a pleasure to have you here. Again, Lud and Rich put some money into this to make it happen, and what we're hoping to do is have a fundraiser in September. We're hoping you'll all come back, and we're hoping that you can help us keep this thing going, because ultimately, what this is, it's a publicity stunt. And I'm looking forward to being questioned about this on TV as we move into phase 2 of this. I'm looking forward to somebody like Jon Stewart saying, what are you doing with this virtual presidency thing? It's a publicity stunt, John. Really? Yeah, of course it's a publicity stunt. Not for me. It's a publicity stunt for these ideas. By the way, John, you're a comedian. You're the most trusted journalist in America. You're a guy pretending to be a journalist, and I'm a guy pretending to be president. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? You have to pretend to be a journalist to get your politics into the mainstream, and I have to pretend to be president to get my politics into the mainstream, and it's great TV, isn't it? But really what we're trying to do, what we really want to do is we want to build up enough traction, enough momentum so that as 2014 rolls around, we want to recruit individual people who never in a million years thought about going to Congress, because our entire theory of government is based on citizen legislators. We want people who said, me run for Congress? I can't run for Congress. I have a business. That's exactly who we want. We want to recruit an entire generation of citizen legislators starting in 2014, and to the degree that this dog and pony show that we do gets enough traction to put a room like this together, we should be able to put rooms like this together for these candidates all over this country. And I'll just travel around the country and we'll raise money for these conservatives and we'll get them into office, because there's only 535 Americans that live in a democracy. The rest of us don't. There's only 435 members of Congress and 100 members of the Senate live in an actual democracy. And as long as we have a percentage of those votes, all these problems we have go away. Time is running short. We have to help get it done. So I'm very, very grateful for Rich and especially Lud, who've done so much to make all this happen. I want to thank you very much for coming out. And I find that the best part of these evenings is for me to open it up for a few minutes anyway, as long as you'd like to stay. I'll stay until the lights go out. And to take a virtual press conference. Because if you realize how easy it is to defend these ideas once you understand them, and if you're not ashamed of them, there's not a question you have out there, I promise you. It doesn't matter if your nephew stumped you with something about gay marriage or whatever, there's not a question on the table in America today that cannot be knocked out of the park, not by me, because it's got nothing to do with me, but done by the application of these principles unashamedly, passionately, and intelligently with a bit of a sense of humor. So thank you so much for coming out today. We really appreciate your support. If you want to help between now and then, I'm sure you can contact these two fine gentlemen. But for now, thank you for coming, and let's have a virtual press conference.